Welcome to Tatyova. Hope you're excited for some Simic Brawl. Get in there and sound these Simic alarms. We have Tatyova. It's going to be 3 colorless, green and a blue. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and you draw a card. Now, Tatyova is one of those commanders that I would consider an enabler commander. It's going to enable any sort of game plan that you want to get going. Now, you do need to have your basic building blocks of having a bunch of lands in here and having some cards that are going to get extra lands onto the battlefield, and of course some ramp. But for the most part, let's say we're playing Joyrun, you need to put a lot of artifacts in your Joyrun deck. As far as Tatyova goes, the only thing she really cares about is a land entering the battlefield to give you some card draw. And so since she enables a lot of card draw, it's really going to keep your game plan open as far as Tatyova and really whatever you want to do. But as far as our particular deck, it kind of settled into a Simic good stuff deck. We have a lot of stuff that we're going to be able to curve out to that's going to help us win. And really, if you want the too long didn't read of this deck tech, our deck is River's Rebuke, followed up by Sylvan Awakening. That's pretty much what the name of the deck is. That's what we're trying to do to help us close the game out. There's some other cool stuff in there which we're definitely going to cover, but long story short, that's what this deck is, and it is a lot of fun to play. But let's go and take a look at some of the ramp that we do have in this deck. We're running Grow from Ashes, Adventurous Impulse, Beneath the Sands. These are all spells that are going to allow us to get that card draw flowing, or simply allow us to kind of ramp into Tatyova a little bit quicker. We're also running Spring to Mind. We can use that to search our library for a basic land, put on the battlefield, and then once it hits the bin, that 6 mana, it may seem like a lot to draw 2 cards, but we have a ton of ramp in here, and it's a really good way to kind of get some extra value late game on the mind part of that card. And we're also running Hour of Promise. Search your library for up to 2 land cards. Now, that's not going to include, you can grab 2 basics if you want to, but it's also going to basically just grab any land that you want. We are running the colorless Scry land, so there's going to be sometimes late game where you get down Hour of Promise and then you just grab a Scry land just to kind of get a little bit of extra value. And also we're running a lot of deserts in here, so if we do get to the point where we have a lot of the deserts down, we can actually end up with a couple zombies on the back end, which is always nice to have a little bit extra value off of. It's always nice to have a little bit extra value off of that. Sorry, I had a little bit of a hiccup on that one. Now, outside of the actual ramp spells on this, we're also running some other good kind of lands matter cards. We have Broken Bond. It's going to allow us to kind of keep some artifacts or enchantments off our opponent's side of the battlefield, and at the same time allowing us to get a card draw from Tatyova when we put that land on the battlefield. Lano War Scout's going to allow us to get that extra card draw, and then Ranging Raptors is going to make it to where our opponent's not really going to want to swing into us, especially if we have Tatyova on the battlefield. But if something does happen, it's going to be dealt damage. We can put that basic land onto the battlefield. Outside of that, we're also running some really good ramp creatures in here. We have Lano War Elves. It's always good to have Lano War Elves back in standard. Skittering Surveyor is going to be kind of like your sad robot for the deck. Enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic card, and we're able to put it back into our hand and then use it as a body to block. And then Weaver of Currents is simply just going to be tapping for 2 colorless mana. We're also running some good utility lands matters creatures. We have Jade Light Ranger. That's going to get that double Explore whenever it enters the battlefield, and the Wayward Swordtooth is going to allow us to play an additional land on each of our turns. And this deck gets to the City's Blessing really quick, so you're going to end up with a 3 mana 5/5 before you know it. Now, we're doing a lot of ramping. We're going to have a lot of ramp spells with all the ramp creatures. What are we going to ramp into? What's going to help us kind of close the game out? We have 3 really good green creatures in here. We have Tendershoot Dryad. I cannot express how good Tendershoot Dryad is in Brawl. It is so good. And being able to get an extra sapling token at the beginning of each upkeep is so good. And then working, if you don't have a send whenever you get it down, pretty much once you get down a sapling token during your opponent's turn and then your turn, you're pretty much going to end up with the City's Blessing on that one. And being able to have your saplings be a 3/3, that really allows you to basically kind of close the game out with a bunch of sapling tokens. Carnage Tyrant, just a really good beat stick creature. We have Trample and Hexproof, can't be countered. And the Multani is going to allow us to kind of have a really big beater creature once we get a ton of lands on the battlefield. But at the same time, we can use that 2 mana activation, return 2 lands to our hand. We can turn it from our graveyard to our hand. But it's going to allow us to kind of get into a situation, let's say that we need to start making a few extra land drops or something like that if we need to get the card draw flowing. Now, as far as our closers in blue, we got some fun closers in here. We have Overflowing Insight. That may seem like a lot of mana, but Brawl is pretty much kind of a slower format. So there's going to be a lot of times where we exhaust our opening hand, and then simply being able to ramp into an Overflowing Insight really quick to draw 7 cards is really good. Shahili's Artistry is going to keep us online depending on whatever our opponent's sort of board state's going to get going. Create a token that's a copy of an artifact or a creature, or both if we want to. And then Karn's Temporal Sundering. That's going to allow us to kind of go for an extra tempo play, or we can follow it up with something like Sylvan's Awakening. Now, some of the good utility cards that we're running in here is going to be In Bolus's Clutch. He's going to give you a hug. Enchant Permanent, you control Enchanted Permanent. We're also running Brawl's Expertise to kind of go for a tempo play and cast some stuff out of our hand. And then Trancing Melody is going to allow us to gain control of some creatures. Like I said, we're running a lot of good ramp creatures for the deck, but not necessarily good beater creatures. So being able to take our opponents' big kind of control-y style creatures that's going to let them win the game and take it for our side of the board, it's kind of going to help us push us into an alternative win condition. Now, the fun part to the deck, that's going to be River's Rebuke and Sylvan Awakening. That is pretty much what this deck wants to do. We want to get to the point where we get a ton of lands on the battlefield. We're going to go for a River's Rebuke, maybe followed up with Karn's extra turn, and then followed up with Sylvan Awakening, swinging in for lethal. There's just going to be a lot of times that the game drag on with Brawl that when you go for a Sylvan Awakening and you end up with around 10 or 12 lands that are 2/2s, indestructible, and haste. That's usually going to be enough for you to kind of close the game out. Now let's take a look at some of the utility spells that we're running in here. We're not running a ton of counters in here. We have Supreme Will, counter target spell unless they pay 3. And then we can also look at the top 4 cards of our library if we need to kind of filter for something. Divination is going to allow us to draw some cards, and then Disallow is going to be a really good hard counter for the deck, keeping us online for, let's say that we are playing against a Planeswalker, they're going to go for their ultimate. We can use Disallow to counter that activated ability, or, you know, counter any sort of triggered ability that we need to. Now, as far as some of the utility creatures that kind of help us push, we're also running Guy's Blessing, shuffle of 3 cards in their library if we need to play against any sort of graveyard style deck. It's also going to allow us to draw a card, and since we're turning through our deck so much, you know, there may be a few key cards that we want to put back into our deck, and Guy's Blessing also helps us do that. And we're also running Naturalize because there are a ton of artifacts and enchantments in Brawl. Now, onto utility creatures that we're running in here. We're also running Brawl, Chief of Compliance. It's going to give a reduced cost off our spells. Rashmi is going to give us just basically some extra value once we start casting our stuff. And then Naru Miha just reminds me of Miha. Anyway, we're going to allow it, we can flash her. We're not really running a ton of wizards in here. The main reason she's in here is simply just because for the late game, it's always good to have a 4 mana, you know, copy target spell. Let's say that we end up going for Overflowing Insight. We can flash her in and draw an extra 7 cards. I'll definitely want to pass it up. We definitely want to have that option, or simply just flashing her in for a 3/3 body to start swinging into your opponent. That's something we can also do. But that's going to be the deck tech. That's going to be it. I do have 3 gameplay videos up for you right now if you want to check them out. And I had a lot of interesting games with Tatyova. And if you're thinking about getting into Brawl, I highly suggest building Tatyova. She just makes for a really fun game plan. And as long as you just have a lot of ramp and a lot of good utility creatures, just pick out, you know, 5 or 6 finisher cards and then go to town and have some fun. But that's going to be it for the deck tech. And in fact, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.